recent racial incident at Stellenbosch University involving a white student, Theuns du Toit. Du Toit is an Afrikaner male in his early 20s, admitted for law studies at what is arguably one of the bastions of Afrikaner-led intellectual institutions. Over the weekend, the Western Cape institution once again brought the spotlight on the fallacy of outside household socialization and social cohesion. To share more on this, we're joined by Dr. Lucky Mathebula from the THINC Foundation. Dr. Mathebula, very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, let's perhaps go back to decoding this matter that has sparked a lot of controversy and brought again the question of racism back under the spotlight. As you first watched the video and listened to its content, what emotions were evoked within you as you relived perhaps some of the aspects of a time that you were once living in?
Look, it was it gave mixed feelings, and let me greet you, Paul, and your viewers, and say thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. I think it gave mixed feelings, really mixed feelings. Remember, we grew up in the time of vintage discrimination, where you would watch people inside a wimpy eating nice, and then you were only allowed to buy from a window. And this thing of people being urinated against, we grew up knowing it as stories that were told by other people, and it's not a new thing. But the truth of the matter is that one of the emotions that evoked in me was that this young man, Theuns du Toit, is a victim of his socialization. He is now going to be a victim of his actions, so he's going to be a victim for the second time, but I think he's a victim of his socialization. And if we do not interrogate that aspect of him being a victim like many other young white Afrikaner boys and girls, just to check to say, why is it that the supply side of young boys like him, it happened in the Free State and other, seems not to be stopping. It is relentless. We have a supply of this type of young people. So there's something in the social space that is anchoring them to want to continue doing this.
So how then is he a reflection of perhaps a much deeper matter?
Just a high-level check on who is Theuns du Toit. Theuns du Toit is the son of a farmer from Worcester, a wine farmer, and I must say that before I characterize the potential socialization, it was very heartening to see that his father actually wants to meet the father of Babalo. And that aspect on its own tells you that there is an element of remorse from the father, who's a wine farmer, trying to say to the country that, look, this is my son, and I want to find out what happened, but it's a matter that I want to talk to the father of the other boy. The extent to which that approach will succeed to take down the emotion of Babalo's father is an academic question. But what I want to talk to you about is that the stories that we hear about wine farms, how they are used to paying some of the workers historically with the wine and all those things in the Western Cape, if those stories apply to his farm, and then this boy grew up in an environment that has no respect for people who are othered by the institution that he grew up. We also need to go deeper and say, but what school did he go to in Worcester? What school did he go into? What primary school he went to? Who are the teachers that taught him? What is the composition of that school? How are the workers and the gardeners in that school treated? In the high school again, what culturally youth clubs did he go to? And what was taught there? What church is he going to? How is that church having a relationship with black people? Then all those things, because this boy has been in the schooling system for 12 years and he has been in Stellenbosch for 2 years. So these things that are happening, they should be coming a long way from behind. So this investigation that is going to be coming up needs to go deeper than that. And it is exciting that to hear that SASCO, for the first time, SASCO demanded an institutional solution to this, and they said they want a commission of inquiry to look at racism in Stellenbosch, and there I say, even in other historically white universities, particularly the White Afrikaner University. They need to go deeper into those institutions and say, but guys, why is it that it seems like we have a supply of boys that are doing the funny things that they're doing? We know in Tekis it happened. We know in Potchefstroom something like that it happened. We know in Stellenbosch it happened. And we know that in Orange Free State it happened. And we also know that in some of the technicals that are historically white, such things are happening. So we need to interrogate this thing as a bigger thing, and how is this thing impacting on the workplace that we are seeing where racism is unable to recede.
And in your decoding and perhaps making Theuns a case study for an even bigger matter that really needs big solutions, as you make mention of the solution put forward there by the union, what then does this now speak to when it comes to the sort of punishment, so to speak, that needs to follow? Because there's been a lot of criticism that he's merely just been suspended. And also, just looking at the update, Stellenbosch now has postponed exams by a week because of this, and the other matter which relates to allegations of rape.
You know, this thing of suspending him and the calls for expulsion, it's good and bad. It's good because it gives a modicum of immediate justice or instant justice, to say he's suspended and he's fired and he's no longer into the university. But it does not deal with the justice that is required to deal with institutional racism. Because to remove Theuns, you have not removed the phenomenon of Theuns. We should elevate Theuns to be a phenomenon in these institutions, to say there is this phenomenon of young kids that are socialized in spaces where there are no role models of black people in those schools. I mean, we need to interrogate some of these single medium schools and single race schools to say, guys, what is the possibility that the way these kids are being brought up in single medium schools, single race schools, is actually entrenching racism? We need to investigate it. I cannot conclusively say that it is, but the outcomes that we see in the workplace, the outcomes that we see in the universities are indicating that the problem is deeper inside the schooling system, inside the socialization system. I mean, you look at some of the arrogances that we are seeing. I mean, if there are people that will spend thousands to go to a Supreme Court and argue for the apartheid flag to come back, those people are culturally convinced of the correctness of their cause. And that cultural convincing of them has to do with what is potentially influencing the Theuns phenomenon out there. So this thing is bigger. We need not Theuns, sorry, I have a friend called Theuns, but Theuns du Toit. This Theuns du Toit phenomenon, we need to go deeper into it and begin to ask questions to say, are these schools preparing these kids to a non-racial South Africa? We've seen parents going and marching against financially Sufi, trying to transform the schools, and you could see the passion at which these parents are fighting some of the changes that Mandela took. But these people are convinced that what they are doing is correct, even if it has all the elements of racism, and it is urinating against the non-racialism that South Africa has adopted in 1994. So the urinating of the study desk of Babalo is actually urinating on our constitution. And it's not Theuns, it is the phenomenon that Theuns is representing.
You say Theuns is a victim because he's a product of how he was socialized. What then happens to the other victim of a racist act?
Yes, now we look at Babalo. Babalo is also going to be a victim and a bigger victim. One of the biggest things that Babalo is going to face is that once he completes, Babalo might have challenges of being employed because he represents one of the people that exposed the Theuns phenomenon. So we also need to deal with how do we deal with the victims of racism that react to racism. I mean, you listen to the way Babalo dealt with it. Babalo rushed to the police station and criminalized this thing, and he says this man has burglared into his room, but he has also violated his rights. Now, what rights of Babalo did he violate? And I can tell you now, there will be lawyers that are going to stand and defend Theuns du Toit, and those lawyers will be arguing that Theuns was drunk and all those things. And it is that phenomenon that South Africa needs to quickly take this thing out of the court system and say, guys, we are dealing with a big problem here. Can we deal with this racism once and for all and approach this thing? I'm happy that Minister Blade Nzimande is going into that space decisively, and I hope that when the University of Stellenbosch puts up that commission, they actually try to get judges that understand what racism is and judges that will be able to teach South Africa what racism is. It should not be a punitive commission of inquiry to look at Theuns du Toit, but it should be a commission of inquiry to the level of the commissions of inquiry that came out with the Policy of Boundary Education, Policy of Group Areas Act. All those policies of apartheid, they came out of commission. So we cannot undo racism without a deeper understanding of where does racism come from. And I argue that racism comes from the schooling system, the cultural environment that these kids grow up, the churches they grow up, the bride discussions they have, the dinner table discussions they have with parents, and all those things, the idiomatic expressions that you find in them, either in slang, in folklore, or anywhere. These kids are not innocent. These kids are representing a particular phenomenon that South Africa is dancing around. You know, there's an elephant dance around the elephant, and until we go there and say, guys, where is this racism coming from? Why it's not going down? I mean, this boy is 20 years. So he was born, we are now 28 years in a democracy. So he was born in a democracy. What in his face? In 20 years, this boy.
You know, as you speaking, I'm reading the bottom part of your opinion piece where you make reference to a quote that you used of former President Nelson Mandela, which you posted in another blog spot in 2018, where it reads that no one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or background or his religion. Really, really speaking to, you know, a healing process that needs to be undertaken here.
Yes, Nelson Mandela continues in that quote. He says, people learn, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes naturally to the human heart than its opposite. And Mpo, let me share this. You know, in South Africa, we've got what we call templates of dominance. What are the things that are templates that make other people to dominate the others? One of the templates of dominance is racism. The more people keep one race to look like it's supreme to the other, the more they have a capacity to can dominate the other races. The second one is the rationalization of the correctness of dispossession. You know, when people talk about we have been dispossessed of land and whatever, and they argue it, and people rationalize that that dispossession is correct, then that template will remain untouched. Then economic exclusion is another template of dominance. And then also the dehumanization of the other, like urinating and giving workers urine to eat with their food and all those things. So these four templates of domination If these commissions of inquiry are not going to also reflect on that, we are just dealing with the symptoms, we are plastering over the cracks of racism. Racism has receded. It is only the inhumanity of apartheid that people have accepted, that apartheid must go. But I'm not sure that people have accepted that the advantages that apartheid came with should actually go. And that is where we need to deal with racism as an outcome or a residue of apartheid, and it is impacting on how our country is. And this is what my piece in the blog is actually appealing to say, you can not fire the phenomenon he's representing.
And you know, as you make mention of that aspect, I mean, and how we are only merely dealing with the symptoms and that the roots are still entrenched within the ground, what does this now speak to when it comes to a younger crop of learners, perhaps ones in primary schools and high schools, when it comes to being a victim of racism and being able to stand your ground against it?
You know, human beings react to systems and they react to how they are conditioned. The more we allow the conditioning of children to believe that they are of a supreme race, one, the more we allow the system to condition children to believe that they can be taught on their own and other people cannot access what they are being taught and the advantages that they have. They grow up understanding that they are better and there are other people that are not better. So the young ones that are coming, if we are not going to interrogate the systems through which they are coming through and look at what that system is doing to them and try to change that, there will be a lot of differences. And there I say, that I serve in a number of interesting committees and I spend time with a number of senior Afrikaners. And let me put a challenge to some of them to say, when are they going to start to debunk the myth that being Afrikaner requires you to have as a condition a basis? They need to deal with that themselves, to say, as Africa, to be Afrikaner is not racist. To be white Afrikaner is not racist. You can be a Umbrias Nodier. You can be a Carl Niehaus. You can be a Brown Fisher. You can be a Derek Hanekom. You can be many other Afrikaners that have demonstrated their capacity to be non-racial. So we need to challenge the Afrikaner leadership in this country, Afrikaner business leadership, to say, guys, deal with this thing. Because this thing is starting to say to us that it doesn't look like you are actually dealing with it institutionally and phenomenally, to say, deal with the phenomenon that this thing must collapse so that you emerge with an Afrikaner in Afrikaans. And that is what we're missing.
Yeah, absolutely. Some food for thought. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Lucky Mathebula from the THINC Foundation, speaking and decoding a young man, Theuns du Toit of the Stellenbosch University. Is he a victim or a villain? Of course, some really important elements coming out of that conversation. Still ahead.